I thought the hardest moment of my life would be losing a child I was trying to save. I never imagined it would be walking into my own wedding and discovering my future husband had replaced me before I even arrived. 3 hours earlier, I was in an emergency room fighting to save a 6-year-old girl's life. When I finally reached the courthouse, exhausted and still wearing my surgical gown under my dress, everyone was already celebrating. My groom was standing beside another woman, and the person holding her bouquet was the last person I ever expected. My name is Haley Carter. I'm 29 years old, and for most of my adult life, I have been the person people called when they needed someone to stay calm during a crisis. I'm a pediatric surgeon in Chicago, and I always believed that helping children wasn't just my career. It was the reason I was put on this earth. I knew my job would demand sacrifices, but I never imagined one of those sacrifices would happen on the morning of my own wedding. Daniel and I had spent 6 years building what I thought was the kind of love people search their whole lives for. He knew my schedule was unpredictable. He knew there were nights I would leave dinner halfway through because a child needed me. And he always told me he admired that part of me. "You have the biggest heart of anyone I know," he used to say. Those words were the reason I trusted him completely. My best friend Olivia had been beside me through every major moment of my life. She helped choose my wedding dress, organized my bridal shower, and stood beside me whenever I needed support. I never once questioned her loyalty. On my wedding morning, I woke up believing I was about to begin the happiest chapter of my life. My dress was hanging by the window, my family was arriving, and my heart was filled with excitement. But before I could even walk down the aisle, my phone rang. It was the hospital. A 6-year-old girl had arrived in critical condition, and only I could save her. For a few seconds, I just stared at the hospital's emergency number flashing on my screen. My wedding dress was already on. My hair was done. My family was waiting. In less than 2 hours, I was supposed to walk toward the man I loved and promise him forever. But then I heard the words that changed everything. "Dr. Carter, we have a 6-year-old girl in emergency surgery preparation. Her condition is critical. We need you now." I closed my eyes for a moment, hoping someone else could take my place. But I already knew the truth. I was the specialist who could give that little girl a chance. I called Daniel immediately. "I'm going to be late," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "There's a child who needs me." At first, he sounded worried. He told me to be careful and promised he would wait. I believed him. I rushed into the hospital still wearing pieces of my wedding morning. The little girl was terrified, surrounded by strangers, and fighting for her life. When I looked at her tiny hand gripping mine, I stopped thinking about the clock. For hours, I worked with my team, refusing to give up. When we finally succeeded, the room filled with relief. The child was going to live. But when I looked at the time, my heart dropped. 3 hours had passed. I grabbed my things and rushed toward the courthouse, believing I was only late to my wedding. I had no idea I was arriving after everything had already changed. The moment I arrived at the courthouse, I knew something was wrong. It wasn't the angry looks I expected. It wasn't the whispers or the disappointment. It was the silence. A room full of people who were supposed to be celebrating me suddenly became completely still. I stepped inside, still wearing my wedding dress, my hands shaking from exhaustion. I looked around, searching for Daniel's face, expecting him to run toward me, expecting him to understand why I had been late. But instead, I saw him standing at the front of the room. And he wasn't alone. My heart stopped when I saw Olivia standing beside him, holding the bouquet that was supposed to be in my hands. For a moment, I couldn't understand what I was seeing. Then Daniel looked away. That was when I noticed the paperwork on the table. They had already done it. They had already gotten married. 3 hours. That was all it took for the man who promised me forever to choose someone else. Daniel tried to explain. He said he thought I had abandoned him. He said he couldn't wait forever. He said everyone was already there. But none of those words made sense. Because he knew me. He knew I would never walk away without a reason. Then Olivia looked at me with a smile that felt colder than any words. And my mother-in-law laughed.
"You're too late," she said.
"Get out of here." I stood there silently, realizing the person I trusted most had broken my heart. Then suddenly I noticed someone standing near the doorway. Someone who had heard everything. The person standing near the doorway was the little girl's mother. She had tears in her eyes, and she walked slowly into the room holding her daughter's hospital bracelet in her hand. "I'm sorry," she said softly, "but everyone here needs to know the truth." The room became silent. She explained that I had not been missing because I didn't care about my wedding. I was late because I had spent hours saving her daughter's life. She told everyone how close they had come to losing their little girl and how I had refused to stop fighting until she was safe. I watched as the expressions on everyone's faces changed. The people who had judged me moments earlier suddenly looked uncomfortable. Daniel looked down, because the truth was finally standing in front of him. But that wasn't the only truth that came out that day. Later, while I was trying to process everything, I discovered messages between Daniel and Olivia. Messages that proved this wasn't a sudden decision made because I was late. They had been getting closer for months. They had talked about a future together before my wedding day even arrived. Daniel didn't replace me because I was late. He was already looking for a reason to leave. Olivia wasn't my friend protecting my relationship. She was waiting for her chance to take my place. I looked at the ring on my finger and realized something painful. I wasn't losing the man I loved. I was finally seeing the man he truly was. Slowly, I removed the ring and placed it in my hand. For the first time that day, I felt free. The weeks after my wedding day were some of the strangest weeks of my life. For a while, I felt like I was living in someone else's story. I had spent years imagining that day would be the beginning of my forever. Instead, it became the day I learned who truly belonged in my life and who never did. But slowly, I stopped asking why Daniel and Olivia hurt me. I started asking what I wanted my future to look like. I went back to the hospital, back to the children who needed me, and back to the reason I became a doctor in the first place. Every time I walked into that pediatric ward, I remembered the little girl whose life I had saved. She became a reminder that my choice that day was never wrong. Months later, I received a message from Daniel. He said he regretted everything. He said losing me was the biggest mistake of his life. He told me he finally understood that I had chosen someone's life over a ceremony, and he should have been proud of me instead of replacing me. But I didn't feel the anger I expected. I just felt peace. Because the truth was, I didn't want revenge. I didn't need to watch him suffer to know I had made the right choice. My greatest victory was waking up every morning knowing I had never betrayed myself just to make someone else happy. And that was something Daniel could never take away from me. A few months later, Daniel asked to meet me one last time. At first, I didn't want to go. I had spent so much time rebuilding my peace that I was afraid opening that door again would bring everything back. But I realized something. I wasn't going there for him. I was going there for myself. We met at a quiet cafe near the hospital, where we first used to talk about our future. Daniel looked different. Not because he had changed, but because for the first time, he looked like someone who understood what he had lost. He apologized again. He said he panicked. He said he felt abandoned. He said he wished he had waited. I looked at him and asked the only question that mattered. If you truly loved me, why didn't you trust me enough to wait? He had no answer. Because deep down he knew. The problem was never that I was 3 hours late. The problem was that when life tested him, he chose the easiest path instead of the right one. I told him a wedding lasts one day, but character is revealed in the moments when things don't go according to plan. Then I stood up and walked away. And this time, I wasn't walking away heartbroken. I was walking away free. After that day, I stopped looking at my wedding as the moment my life fell apart. I started seeing it as the moment my life finally changed direction. I continued working at the hospital, caring for children and families who were facing their hardest moments. Every now and then, I would receive updates about the little girl I saved. She was growing stronger, going back to school, and living the life she almost lost. Knowing that made me smile, because if I had to choose again, I would make the same decision every single time. Eventually, I met someone new. Someone who didn't see my compassion as an inconvenience. Someone who understood that my heart was not something to compete with. He loved the part of me that Daniel once failed to appreciate. Looking back, I used to think losing Daniel was the worst thing that ever happened to me. Now I know it was the moment I learned my worth. The right person will never punish you for doing what is right. The right person will never make you choose between your values and their approval. Sometimes the people who walk away from you are not taking something from you. Sometimes they are making space for the people who were always meant to stay.